I would have to admit that this particular weekend and week has been one of the most outstanding of my life for two particular reasons. I have never seen a workshop in which so much was accomplished and so much meat was offered. Should rephrase that. But secondly, as you have just done, I have never been abused so much. Upon first coming in, our brother Grand High Alpha asked me to lead in prayer. And before I could even get to the banquet, I had several people who were saying, "Don't be too long, don't be too long, you're always too long, you're always too long." I went back to my room. I was ready to come downstairs. They had met and started without me. I don't wish to say too much about our executive director, about complaining too much in public. It's just that he always seems to be upon the southern delegation, particularly about our drawl and our mispronunciation. I think that we very seldom mispronounce anything, even in front of George Spastic. And I'd like to say the last thing if you people have not met and known Bobby Ray Hicks, then you have already been honored. Bob had a slight heart attack about 4 years ago, and ever since then, he's been trying to give me one. Every time I come to one of these, he says, "Let's jog, let's jog." And every morning we've been getting up at about 6 o'clock, and I am not a jogger. We said we were going to jog together. I chased him over 4 counties. This morning is the last time I will jog with him. I begged him to keep taking a left to come back toward campus. He said no, he had some special places. First, we passed a doctor's office. I should have known. Next, we went very close to a graveyard. I guess he really ought to be a better jogger than I am. Old bag of bones. Anybody that shaved their head just so they could run faster. I want to talk with you for a while tonight because we've used cathedrals so much on building cathedrals. On building cathedrals and outhouses. You know, everyone else here is so sophisticated, I really don't fall into that category, but I'm probably more familiar with building outhouses than I am cathedrals. And first of all, for all of you who have lived in the city and never had the grand and great opportunity of going to the bathroom in an outhouse, let me explain to you exactly what this is. This is a little house behind the big house. It is the place where one goes to the bathroom, but there is no running water. Number one, there is really no great need in an outhouse to be too elaborate. If you really want to be elaborate, the only elaborate ones that I've ever seen had 2 holes. I cannot imagine sitting beside of someone Second, let me mention to you that you really don't need to be too permanent in building this particular outhouse, because when the hole gets filled up, you got to move that thing anyway. And third, let me tell you that outhouses are outdated. As a matter of fact, in most places now, they're against the law. They tell me they're unsanitary, and I would suggest that they are probably fulfilling one of man's only baser needs. However, building a cathedral is a little different. First of all, in building a cathedral, it has to be highly designed. It's nothing that you can just put together. Probably an engineer is at least needed. Secondly, it does have to be a lasting structure, and I guess that's the reason so many times they are built in brick and in marble and in cement. And third, these cathedrals serve one of man's highest needs, that which is spiritual. My suggestion to you tonight is that all of us are builders, some building cathedrals and some of us building outhouses. In the process of building these outhouses, it is not necessary that we're actually building the building. I'm afraid that sometimes we're building these outhouses while we are in fact building lives and families, sometimes chapters, and sometimes even a fraternity. I think there are some important factors that we have to consider and that you have to consider tonight because of the stage in which you are, because of what you have been through this week, because you are ready to go back, because you are our messengers. And first of all, if you are in fact going to be a cathedral builder, you have got to be committed to a master standard. And of course, that standard we have illustrated by saying a standard of excellence. Secondly, you've got to expect to be able to work through the failures and frustrations that you're going to have, and you are going to have them. And one of the toughest things is you are going to have to be the example in leadership and in model. I don't envy you one bit. In being committed to a standard of excellence, I think it's very interesting if we could determine just exactly where our standards come from. If we go back into psychology, we can say at this stage in your life, probably they come from three places. The first place which they may come from is from your primary group, preferably your family, your background. Secondly, they would come from society and society's media and society's pressures. And third, a part of that, it comes very specifically from your peer groups. And you're the peer group. In looking back at this primary group, it's important that you realize that young men who come to you already have certain standards. They may be buried deep because of recent experiences, but these standards are there. Several years ago, when I was in high school, I could remember, even as a senior, there were certain standards which I carried on, which were my mother's standards. I can remember the very last football game which I participated in. I can remember my mother had never seen a football game. We lived so far out, she didn't know one existed. And finally, in the last game of the season, all the people invited her to come to a football game to see me play because I'm so good. Now, I'll tell you, when they came, they gave her her very first bouquet at this time. And I can remember they placed her right behind our bench. And I can remember, the only thing I could remember that night, basically during the first half, is that it rained and my mother came out and said, "Why don't you quit?" And the game was really one of those games that was a very hard-hitting thing. And finally, we left during the first half, and we went in, and the coach gave us all this pep talk and everything. And I, being the senior and the captain and everything, I told everybody to get behind me and the freshmen get the end because I want the glory when we run outside. Because, all these thousands of people are going to be waiting for us. And I can remember running out, and I can remember going through the door, going to the left, and all of a sudden heading through the goalpost, and everybody's standing up, and the cheerleaders are hollering, "Isn't everything wonderful?" And I looked over on the 40-yard line, and there was my mother. And my mother is pointing to me and saying, I thought, "My God, Mother, don't you know who I am?" And I can remember evading this for a while and still running sort of down the middle of the field with 70 people following me behind and still seeing her. I thought, if I go on down the 50-yard line, I'll cut over to the bench, I'll leave them there, I'll take another right turn, and we'll have our private talk. And I went to the 50-yard line, I took a right turn, I took another right turn, and there was my mother, and those other 70 fools followed me. And there I stood in front of my mother. The cheerleaders didn't know what to come on, so they've come out now. Then other people, the principal came over because something must be wrong, and I can remember my mother stopping everyone saying, "I have something to say, Murphy." As everyone was very quiet, she told me, she says, "Number one, Murphy," says, "I don't mind you being out here in the rain, although it seems foolish. I don't mind you knocking these boys down in the mud and wallowing like pigs. It doesn't bother me. I don't mind them knocking you down and watering like pigs. That doesn't bother me." He says, "But Murphy, don't you drink out of the same dipper with the rest of these boys." Well, I want to tell you, up until this day, to my knowledge, I don't drink after anybody. It is one of these things that seems to come back to haunt us all, and at the same time to give us a great deal of sustenance. These standards that we had, and somehow maybe faltered with them. And then I speak of the second way in which we obtain standards, and that is in society and in society's pressures. And I have to tell you, I'm very, very worried. I'm worried about our youth. I'm worried about you. I'm worried about me. I'm worried about my wife. I'm just worried. Because one of the things that I see is I don't see society helping us very much. One of the greatest things that we have going for us now are not just television, but the darn advertisements. Because in an advertisement of 30 seconds, they spend as much money as they do for the 30-minute program. Because they're selling. These people are master salesmen. I'm amazed at the type of things that we pick up and the standards that we think. In an advertisement, a man is standing there. He's getting ready to go out the door. He looks back at his wife and he says, I'm going to go get this job today. He starts out the door and all of a sudden she says, have you had your deodorant? No, I haven't. He takes the deodorant. He sprays under both arms. He comes back. He then comes back in. I got the job. My God, you know what that means? If you want the job, you've got to spray. The only thing that means anything is the standard of spraying under your arms so you won't stink. Isn't that wonderful? But you know, if you want to be confident, raise your hand if you want to be confident. Raise your hand, sure. That's no problem. All you've got to do to have confidence in this world is be able to raise your hands. Isn't it amazing? The types of standards that we seem to set up. The things that we begin to believe. And yet this probably is not so important when we look at the other things. Did you realize until about 10, 12 years ago that there were no alcoholic advertisements that had college men in it? Now do you know you're one of the biggest? Oh, I'm sure you've got to remember. Because you've seen this guy in the advertisement. He's in the race, and he's running, and he's finally got out in front, and he breaks it. And all of a sudden, in one arm, pops a good-looking chicken, in the other one, a beer. Now, man, that's a reward. Hey, but that's not the best of them. Let me tell you, we finally have these women down on our level. You know, we've got them having cancer and everything, just like we do now. We've got them smoking. Isn't that terrific? And do you know how we got them to do it? Oh, you think we just had smoked these cigarettes like men? No way. You remember the woman who came out, all dressed up in her gray flannel suit. And as she walks into the office, very commonly, she reaches down and she takes her Virginia Slim. I've often wondered if they called that thing Virginia Fat, do you think she'd have picked it up? No, if you want to be successful, if you want to be all the things and the success that men have, all you've got to do is smoke. Hey, that's not so bad. I'm going to be a Marlboro man. You know what I really want to do is, I want to ride up in that mountain. I want to go across those snow-capped hills. I want to ride on that horse because I can't ride horses. And if I can smoke this cigarette, I can ride that monster. I can see me now going across that, you know. This is going to be great. All I've got to do is just smoke that cigarette. Somehow, some type of little things creep into us. But even that's not the greatest. The greatest advertisement that I have ever seen in my life took place, just a few years ago. Because, you see, I looked at my grandmother, and I can remember as a young kid, I looked at her, and I could see this stuff running down the side of her mouth, and I said, boy, that will never reach my generation. Never. And the thing sort of died out. And one day in 1976, late in the 6th game of the World Series, a catcher got up by the name of Carlton Fisk. They pitched the ball on the outside with the man on base. He hit the thing over the left field fence, and they won the game. Carlton Fisk, our hero. 2 months later, on television, he said, you take a little dud and you put a little thing right on your head. Every athlete in America had to start dipping. It's a standard to be athlete that you got to chew or dip. Not me. Because I have an idea that somewhere in my life I got to choose between kissing and dipping, and I don't believe they're going to mix. I guess in this great worry and paranoia that I have, one of the things that I am deeply concerned about, even beyond the media, is peers. Gee, you know, we're at the place now that we realize that somewhere between the ages of 12, 13, and 14, all of a sudden, we start breaking away from our parents and we start going to peer groups. Right now, you guys who are at college, isn't it wonderful? Because as a freshman, in faculty, we tell all the faculties I've ever been in, you got 2 weeks to tell them everything they want to know. Because at that, they're not going to believe us, they're going to believe their peers. And peers lie as well as we do. It finally ends up at some point in here, peer pressure and peer opinion is greater than any other opinion. And let me tell you, folks, you're afraid of it. Some of your executive committees have faltered because of peer opinion. But I guess that's not all too bad, because I look at society today and I look who is going to be coming to you in the future. And I worry about the people you're going to be obtaining, who will be coming to college, because already I see where 2 out of every high school people have been so influenced that 2 out of every 5 boys now in high school had some drinking problem. 87% of all college people drink regularly. That illegal drugs are generally started about the 9th grade. That 67% of all high school students agree that illegal drugs, if not too hard, are acceptable. And yes, I guess I do have to mention sex. In the state which I lived last year, 1 out of every 200 girls between the ages of 10 and 14 was pregnant last year. 1 out of every 10 girls between the ages of 15 and 19 had an adolescent pregnancy. My suggestion is that maybe we males had something to do with that. But you know, there's another problem in looking at this too. Somehow we have almost gotten into sex as thinking that this is something that's a physical thing. We can go ahead and it's all right, and we've lost the holiness of the complete act. And yes, that bothers me. We reached the 60s and the 70s and we said, this is the age of experimentation. I was in physiology. I know that 95% of all the rats that we experimented on died. And if this is the age of experimentation, then I hope we're coming to the end of it. Because right now, the second leading killer of teenagers in the United States is suicide. And for adults, there are more suicides than homicides. I'm afraid that in many ways, we built a wasteland of outhouses and not built too many cathedrals. Yet, somehow there seems to be a glowing trend, and I honestly pray and feel that your leadership's going to make the difference. That we're going to start, and you're going to start. I look now and we work through the failures and frustrations that you're going to have when you go back, because my assumption is that you have bought into all the standards and the decency, and that whenever you go back, you're going to explain what you're going to need to do. But let me tell you, fellas, you know what's going to happen. All those whose standards are a little bit lower than yours are going to fight you. They're going to give reasons not to do it. It's going to be hard to sell. And at this time, you've got to have a plan, because cathedrals are built with design. And cathedrals are different than outhouses. And you're going to have to follow through. And following through is the toughest thing, because right now, you are here with some of the cream of the world in collegiate life. We've got to go back to the world of outhouses. When we're not all together, we can't support each other. And you're the leader. And following through is one of the toughest things. One of the greatest examples of following through I have ever seen was when I was at High Point College. And I loved athletics, and every afternoon I would go over to see our basketball team. And we had one specific player, a player by the name of Charlie Floyd. Charlie was All-American his junior year and his senior year. And every afternoon I would go over, and Charlie and I would shoot free throws. I think I would shoot 100 and Charlie would shoot 1,000. And I end up throwing them back constantly. And every time Charlie would get up, he would shoot over and over again every afternoon. He lined up every afternoon, 1,000 after everyone left. He still shot 1,000. He'd come on Saturday. He'd come on Sunday. He'd come in the summer months. And every time I'd say, Charlie, it's late in the game. It's 1 second. You got 2 shots. We can win it or lose it. And Charlie would start shooting. 400 in a row he shot. Finally, his senior year, we are 1 point behind with 10 seconds to play, and they give Charlie the ball, and I say, thank God. And Charlie drives up. They know they've got to foul Charlie, and all of a sudden they foul him before he gets into shooting position. Charlie walks up to the line. And at this time, I look at Charlie, and Charlie looks at me, and their coach calls timeout. We walk over. Charlie comes back to the line. Their coach calls timeout. Charlie comes back to the line. That coach had better be praying, because Charlie's going to make both of those darn things, because Charlie has followed through. I already know, and I'm ready to bet my wife on this one. There is no question, because he has already followed through, and he's been in this situation, and sure enough, in 2 shots, we're the champions. But let me tell you, that was the easy part. The tough part was following through every day, and finally when he got to the decision wasn't any big thing, because he had already handled it. Day I can remember picking up a shampoo conditioner bottle, and on the back of it said, if you will use this shampoo conditioner, it will give you a full head of hair. Bobby Ray, you just don't have a chance. Sometimes you just don't have that. But let me tell you, fellas, with a group coming around, little by little, you can buy a wig. There's lots of things that can be done for these guys, but let me tell you, you can't be discouraged. You've got to have a design. And just because you don't quite reach that this year, it does not at all mean that you're going to be a failure in the future. The last thing is that you've got to be a leader. And you've got to be the example. As I said, this is the tough stuff. One of the most dangerous things in our society is an undisciplined leader. There's no way in the world you can walk into an executive committee and tell someone else not to do something that you're in the process of doing. Oh, you don't have to brag about it. But boy, you do have to do it. That's the tough part. You fellows are in an unusual position in our fraternity life. There is a great flood. The flood is passing a man's house. He is now on the first floor. As the flood comes by, and finally a man comes by in a boat, and he says, get on, we want to save your life. And he says, no, God will save me. And the boat goes on. Later on in the afternoon, the waters rise. The man is on the porch, on the higher porch this time. Boat comes by. He says, get on, we'll save you. No, no, God will save me. Later he comes in that day, and the man is clinging on to the chimney. Helicopter comes by and says, take the rope, take the rope. No, no, God will save me. And the man drowned. When the man got to heaven, he finally found God and says, God, I don't understand this, you know. I stood there and I waited for you to save me, and I told everyone you would save me, and you didn't save me, and I don't understand it. And God says, you know, I don't understand it either. I sent 2 boats and a helicopter. Fellas, you've been sent 2 boats and a helicopter. My opinion is they came from the same source. My opinion is that you have one of the greatest missions which any Lambda Chi has ever had. As we sit here on a national level, we can talk ideologically, but you're going to talk pragmatically. When you take these things back, you have to realize that you have one of the greatest tools that any fraternity has ever asked anyone to control. Tonight I would even suggest that you are ordained standard bearers. The future of Lambda Chi Alpha in decency and standard be left up to the people in this room and how you'll be able to handle it. I could not be prouder. I could not love you more. I would give anything to be at your campuses. But please know tonight that in this coming precious year, that you will have the prayers and the love of Lambda Chi's and Grand High Zeta members throughout this world. God bless you.